Hello and welcome to In Focus, brought to you from the Up North Media Center. I'm your host, Kimberli with me as my co-host, Anthony Weber. Today we have three wonderful guests with us to discuss the idea, is film influencing our culture, or is it the other way around? Culture influences our story making and film. So today we have with us Rebecca Reynolds. Rebecca is a writer and producer for Paramount, MGM, and HBO. She co-founded 8180 Films, which is a Michigan-based production company founded a few years back in 2007. And she has produced or created films that include the titles Christina, Coexist Comedy Tour, and The Girl on the Train. So welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you, thank you.
Next to her is Aaron Olson. He is here from the Traverse District Library Sight and Sound Department. He studied film in the San Francisco State University, and his family has a history with film, owned 13 movie theaters, you told me, in the area, so welcome.
Thanks.
And Kat Muncey is also with us. She has a long list here, studied English, but then spent some time in advertising for several years before founding her film company called Novum Film Company. She's produced a short film, Thaw of the Dead, and also a full-length feature film that was shot right here in the Traverse City area called Division. Welcome to the show. So let's start out, if we can. Maybe Aaron, you could give us just a brief history, since you've been at the library for several years, of what the trends have been over the last few years, kind of what's changed, what you see happening as far as the kinds of films that people are interested in.
Well, the library was really lucky. We had a director who started I found a document from 1981 that was the first laser video disc collection. It was pretty classic. It had all sorts of titles on there, and there were classics like Jaws, and then there were some foreign films, and I remember going to video stores looking for foreign films, and the collection was always really pretty weak. So the library's really made an intentional kind of effort to try to explore, higher end, critically acclaimed film, to really strive to have a collection that could inform and educate the public in this area about great cinema. So we have a humongous foreign film collection, equally strong documentary collection. There's a specific category for the Traverse City Film Festival. But over the course of time, it's changed. People's appetite, they have basically kind of come a long ways from coming in, and I mean, I'm not dissing any film at all, that but it's gone from Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which is a great film, to people looking for having a vested interest in challenging foreign and documentary films, as well as domestic titles, narrative titles. But lately, if you were to ask me what the most almost feverishly maddening trend is, it's basically the television series. So everything that started with 6 Feet Under and The Sopranos, and that has led up to where we are today with everything from Weeds and Lost and Mad Men to I guess the True Detective would be one of the main, and there's a lot to be said about what it is that makes that drive, what drives that. And actually, I think Tony Soprano is a perfect example of that.
So is this also part and parcel of the binge watching?
It is. We talk to people about their binge watching habits all the time.
Isn't that scary?
It scares me because I don't have any time. I have a 4-year-and-a-half-year-old child, so I have no idea how you do that, but yeah.
Do you think that reflects a change in the quality of TV, or is it reflecting something that's shifting in the viewer?
No, it's the quality of the productions are incredibly high, and I think that the root of it is these The root of it is a sympathetic relationship with the anti-hero, which is the Tony Soprano deal. It's somebody who you love, you develop a really close relationship with, but it's not perfectly clear as to whether they're a good guy, bad guy. That is the anti-hero.
Breaking Bad.
Breaking Bad is the, Breaking Bad is the zenith, pinnacle of that modern day fascination with how we can get close to somebody who we don't really feel that comfortable with, which.
Well, and I think that's both the main characters in True Detective as well.
Yeah, that's
There's a lot of questions about what's going on in their lives.
Absolutely, that's what. Then
I might be comfortable getting close to Matthew McConaughey.
we didn't, as a society before, we just, it was, we weren't that comfortable with that idea. We had the structure was a little bit more defined, and now we're almost taking risks with our ideology.
And Weeds is a perfect example of that too. Single woman on hard times, single mother, and selling pot, and then it just kind of kept going and going into the netherworld, and may have jumped the shark. I don't know.
Maybe.
Good film term, jump the shark. So I've heard they're calling this the golden age of television, and in my mind, as we were kind of walking into the conversation here, I'm thinking film, movies, right? Mm-hmm. But so have you seen a trend from film to television with these more kind of in-depth, sophisticated stories? In other words, with television, it's kind of an unlimited time to really delve into a character. I mean, True Detective was 8 or 10 episodes long, where a movie is still kind of that distinct 2-hour format, right? Do you think that's part of it? Is that the way these series are set up? Is the time frame and the way that we can really become involved?
I think the way we watch things has changed radically. And my husband Jim and I have recently cut the cable and gone to Apple TV, where we can binge watch British television, Danish television, and yet we can also watch our films. And Aaron knows me from several years ago, because Jim and I founded the Beyond the Bay film series with Trudy and Bob Underhill, and it was to bring exactly the movies he was just telling you about, independent American and foreign films. But by the time we decided, to disband it after 10 years, it wasn't because we were tired of doing it. It was because everything that we had worked so hard to bring in was now available.
Yeah.
And so you can watch The Black Book, which is a wonderful, war movie. You can watch it on your Apple TV. And I think television, cable, not network, cable television programs, and all of this access to product now, because the price of making a film has just dropped. You can make a film, we can make a film right now with this crew in there and these cameras. We can make our own film, and I think we should.
We can talk afterwards.
So how does the medium of film, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just completely agree with Rebecca. I mean, accessibility has changed the game 100% of the way. People are watching feature films on their iPhones, and there's something to be said about that immediate gratification of being able to watch any TV show you want right off of, whether it's Apple TV or Netflix or Hulu. It changes things dramatically. I mean, you have to think back, 20, 30 years ago, the beginnings of MTV, they always use the 2-second rule, right? No clip can be more than 2 seconds. I've got to believe that those choices have shaped the way we expect to get things now. Mm-hmm. We expect things to be faster. We expect things to be within reach. So I think that definitely changes the game completely.
Aren't people making movies with their iPhones as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
Not just watching, but making.
Some do.
Yeah.
What do you think the implications are for filmmaking if you have an audience that's increasingly looking for a TV-style show or story where you've got much longer time to develop characters or develop plots, and you've got much more of a fast turnaround in terms of visuals? What impact will that have on the hour-and-a-half film?
Well, as far as television goes, I think that, you know, it's great because you can commit to watching a 40-minute show and you can go on one little mini roller coaster ride and decide if you want to go on another ride. Whereas with film, you know, you're sitting down for usually at least 90 minutes. As far as on the production side of things, like what you're getting at, it puts a lot of pressure on the crew, on the team to come up with material quickly and effectively and then actually execute it.
There's another thing about how you watch a movie. There are those of us who just really want to go to a theater and sit with people. Mm. For those of us who've worked in comedy and drama, you know, you're home alone and you're watching New Girl or not, and you know, you're laughing or not, or you're probably multitasking, but there's something so rewarding. Our film, The Coexist Comedy Tour, which is a comedy doc, was at the Comedy Fest year before last, and I mean, it made I had seen it, you know, and Jim and I had seen it a dozen times during the editing process, but to go in there and sit in a dark movie theater and have your film come up there and spend, I think in this case, 80 minutes in a shared experience. Nothing beats that still. I wouldn't want to watch MI5 with a whole bunch of people, you know, because I couldn't yell at Harry Pierce, you know, the head of MI5, like we do when we watch it at home.
I like to be able to pause it so I can go to the bathroom and things like that. So, so my movie experience includes that.
The shared experience is huge, though, because you know, when I can't remember, Beyond the Bay started what year?
I think it was '99.
'99.
And we ended up. I mean, that's how I got involved in the film festival, because the first year Michael Moore sought us out because he knew about. He was actually coming from where he lived all the way over to Sutton's Bay. And we offered one movie a month for 9 months, 4 showings, you know, Saturday, 2 on Sunday, 1 on Monday, 1 on Tuesday. And we just kind of put up a little poster, and it said Indian Foreign Films. And within a week, we had 600 and something subscribers.
Yeah. Yeah, and on his way, he stopped at the library, at the Traverse Area District Library, and stopped in on Cinema Curiosa, which was the little series that I curated for about 9 years. And he mentioned both of these two things in the beginning stages of the film festival, that he knew that there was interest out there because he would stop in and check these two series out, and he could tell that there were people,
there was a core audience,
that shared experience was actually happening. And we weren't in a basement at the library, but metaphorically we were kind of in the library.
Well,
basement.
There's another thing. At that time when we had Beyond the Bay, things were starting to come out on demand, and we had one guy, he was a curmudgeon, I won't mention his name, Ben. Anyway, Ben would look at the schedule and he would call me and he would say, well, you know, that's coming out on demand. I said, well, okay, Ben, so don't come. He always came. He came because it was the shared experience. And, you know, it's also a social experience before, during, and after.
Yeah.
You go with a group, go after. I remember we showed this independent film, you may not remember, Limbo.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, hello, that's the title. So afterwards we all went out to dinner and people kept coming, what was it about? I mean, what happened at the end? It's like, Limbo.
Yeah.
So what do you think distinguishes a good film from a mediocre or a bad one? And I suspect there's as many opinions as there are people, but I'm interested from each of you, as you watch or create films, what is it? What's the template that you go through that helps you think through whether or not this is something that's worth seeing again or recommending to other people?
Well, the first thing I think about is, you know, something my mother said, that's why they make chocolate and vanilla, so everyone gets a choice. All right, there's a whole range of really great films and guilty pleasures. And,
Sure.
you know, there's everything in between. There are films for certain times. You know, there's this, you know, I don't think you want to go out on your first dinner date and see Food Inc. You know, there are films for times to me. You know, sometimes I just don't want to go see a movie I probably should go see.
I think that really for me, that great film is not patronizing and that it is a transformative experience. That essentially I'm going to be challenged in a pretty significant way. This is a great segue because when I grew up in Suttons Bay, so when I was a kid, I would often go to the Bay Theater, and I had this absolutely disastrous early dating career where I would take girls to see Das Boot.
Exactly.
I literally took a date to see Werner Herzog's Fitzcarraldo.
Oh my God.
It's just not a good idea. No, I mean, they were long.
You learned a lot about this date,
No,
right?
they were long. That was like the only advantage is that they went on forever. But transformative experience would be the thing that compels me. I think that's really underneath it. It's whether you're looking to be kind of entertained but compelled on some level. Maybe it isn't you're looking to walk out with a different, you know, having your life completely changed, although that's usually what I'm after.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Kat?
Wow, you know, I like making film that I would want to see myself, but like Rebecca, I have a lot of guilty pleasures that I don't necessarily like to share. You know, I mean, there are definitely things that I enjoy watching that might not be considered good when you go to Metacritic. However, I just get a kick out of it, or it emotionally impacts me at some level that is meaningful. It's kind of, God, it's such a hard question. I mean, art's just completely in the eye of the beholder. Mm-hmm. I mean, I have some B movies that I like that are just, you know, totally embarrassing, but I still like them for maybe the ideology that's behind them. Sometimes there's a great story with not so great acting, or maybe there's great acting with maybe a weaker story. So I can appreciate parts of something and still consider that I appreciate the whole, if that makes sense.
That's a great way of explaining why I can't turn away when Tommy Boy is on TV.
Love Actually. Yeah. Jim and I, we're admitting it right here. Jim and I watch Love Actually every Christmas.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. It couldn't be more contrived, but we want to watch it, and that's what we do.
It's so sweet.
It is. And everybody's in it.
I want to answer the question as well. Is that okay?
Yes,
I want to answer the question as well, because it's on my list of things, a pet peeve of mine, because I'm an author, and so I'm a storyteller as well. And one of the things that I want from my own storytelling is, as you're saying, to provide a transformative experience, something that makes people think, walk away, maybe with even just a slightly adjusted perspective. That kind of, to me, that's makes it worthwhile. But yet, a lot of the movies lately that I've seen are making millions in a weekend are these movies that are like Identity Thief is one I can think of that,
Sure.
you know, had whatever reviews, and I couldn't stomach 10 minutes of that film. You know, it's just trash to me. And I realize there's subjectivity, but some of these films are just trash.
Well, I think that
Right? They're just entertaining for slapstick, right?
I think that there's...
What's that all about?
Well, I think there's a certain amount of feeding a hungry audience. So you get the right actors in a film, and you know that you're going to be able to sell it to a certain target demographic. you know, right now, and I refuse to watch any of these movies because I feel like they're taking advantage of me. But because hipsters are so particularly nostalgic, you see all of these remakes of those classic favorites that were when I was a child, things that I used to watch, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Transformers. I mean, Hollywood's just totally placating to this demographic, and I just refuse to watch these movies just because I feel like they're trying to get into these childhood special memories of mine that I just want to keep sacred. But these blockbusters are, I mean, they're just going gangbusters and making tons of money.
Well, that's the key. It's, making tons of money. When I first went out to Los Angeles, someone said, well, they don't call it show art. You know,
exactly.
It is and, you know, that is, the bottom line is the bottom line. And, you know, for those of us who can now make our own independent films, you know, we're faced with that. Even though, you know, you might have some known actors and everything, you still don't have, what the independent filmmaker doesn't have now is the machine behind the studio. All the things, you can make the film, you can present the DCP of the film, but you don't have the marketing and all of that distribution. Or even if you have distribution, it has a price tag on it. So show business drives that. So by the same token, you have bodice rippers. If you're an author, you have, you know, bodice rippers. You also have these these movies that are making money hand over fist, and they always will.
Not much ideology in these films.
Well, I was going to mention my beautiful and fascinating girlfriend, Jamie, describes these films with one fairly questionable term, but it's really descriptive, and it kind of...
Can we say it on public
television?
television?
Yeah, we're going to say it. Yeah, it's that people... when you know our world, just an individual trying to make it from Monday through Friday or Saturday, our modern world is incredibly stressful and complicated. Just a single person's weekly undertaking of everything from bills to forms to work responsibilities and financial obligations. People do need to lobotomize occasionally. They just need to chill completely out and not be assaulted with complicated and vexing social mores and problems, and you know, and that's okay. I think that there clearly are enough human beings on the planet to devour all of these different types of both art and escapism, and they're both okay. There are people who, I mean, everybody needs kind of different measures and weights of.
I thought that's why people drink, though. I mean, they go to movies for this.
They go, yeah. It is a safer way to, you know. And you can, if you're careful, you can mix the two just ever so carefully.
Especially if you take a date to Das Boot.
You're gonna need a drink.
She was the girlfriend from way back. Yeah.
So how does telling a story with the medium of film, how does that change the art of storytelling as opposed to writing or the oral tradition before the written tradition kind of took its place? What shifts in a story? Maybe that'll lead us into a conversation about book-to-film adaptations. But as you are trying to tell a story through film, and I don't know if you have written or not in terms of books, but what's the different type of, what are the things you have to consider creating a story in that manner?
Well, I could speak to this from this show I worked on and helped create. We did this segment called, we assume the position that history is based on a true story, and I will use the movie version. Hollywood has had 2 movies, maybe more, but 2 specific movies that I'm thinking about Thomas Edison, you know. what do we all know about Thomas Edison? He was an avuncular guy, and it's like, gee whiz. He was played in Young Thomas Edison by Mickey Rooney. He was Americana of the day. The next time he was played, it was by Spencer Tracy, Edison the Man. Well, nobody's going to have Spencer Tracy electrocute an elephant for profit motives, which is what Edison did. He electrocuted, we had film on it. He was in a battle with George Westinghouse and Tesla over we called it the AC/DC wars, in our show, which was a comedy, but based on, a fact. So Thomas Edison had the more unsuccessful DC current. Westinghouse had the patent on AC. And in order to discredit it, Edison went above and beyond what you would normally think of someone would do. He invented the electric chair and tried to have people, instead of saying electrocuted, called it Westinghouse, to show how unsafe, which wasn't true, AC current was. And the final thing he did was he electrocuted, using Westinghouse's AC, a rogue elephant from Coney Island. So, but the movies, if you see the trailer for Young Thomas Edison, golly, he's befuddled and cute. And then you see Spencer Tracy as Edison the Man, what I've given to the world, the light bulb. So, it's the same as A Beautiful Mind. That whole story, which, didn't it win the Academy Award, or did it? I can't remember. It was definitely nominated.
Definitely nominated.
And John Nash was a mathematical genius who was saved by the love of a good woman. Well, his story is even darker than Edison's. I won't bum everyone out by telling it, but it's based on, when you hear based on a true story, somebody is telling the story they want told for the reasons they want it told. And, in our show, we discussed there are three motives: profit, religion, and sex. My God's better than your God. Who's got the hots for who? And, I'm going to own you. So all of those are seen through some piece of that lens. Who's telling the story is the main thing. Whether it's the filmmaker, the writer, usually in Hollywood, the writer is not the top dog, but, who's telling the story, who's making that film, that's where the message or the motivation comes.
So do you feel like all movies that go out then have some type of either obvious or more subtle worldview or message or purpose that the filmmakers are attempting to convey and perhaps convince or change people's minds? Or do you feel like there's a lot that's just entertainment for the sake of entertainment?
I do feel that there's a lot that's just entertainment. And, but, nobody sets out to make a bad movie. Even the people that made Identity Theft, they probably thought it was very hip here and now, I think
Andy Warhol set out to make bad movies.
Well, he did.
But they were awesome.
They were, and I just went to the Andy Warhol Museum, and I almost had to spend the whole time watching the films. They were just insanely awesome.
Yeah, I've seen, I think it's true that the lion's share of filmmaking is people sort of searching for a vein of interest and that they can entertain people and make a buck, as we've talked about. But there's a lot of experimental art film out there. Warhol made great movies that were actual films with plot lines, and sometimes all of his movies there were great performances from the people at the factory. The one that I saw that probably left one of the most impressionable, it was really a strong impression, was just a movie. It was total torture, where we saw it in Berkeley at the Berkeley Film Forum, and it was Truman Capote reclining on a couch, chewing on a cigar, and that was it. And it was tedium, but when Capote shifted his weight and kind of like moved his cigar around, everybody was just, it was just like something actually happened.
You didn't take a date to this movie.
No. That
would have been like it.
That would have been it, yeah.
Well, what about documentaries?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my experience with documentaries, you know, I've heard people say the same, or have the same criticism, that while the person making the documentary has a certain intention, right? But is it considered journalism, or does that fall in the category of entertainment? What is a documentary, right?
There's all kinds. There's op-ed pieces, there's editorializing, there's leading questions, and then there's really trying to do a strong piece of investigative journalism that takes a balanced and unbiased approach. And there's every variation under the sun. Do
you think there's a duty, though, on the part of the filmmaker to make that clear, or are we on the end of
absolutely not
being a little aware that we're not sure what we're watching, right?
Right. I think it's up to you. I totally agree with that, because first of all, once you're documenting something, you've already stepped in.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You're there.
Yeah.
And everything changes unless you're shooting Truman Capote reclining with a cigar. You know, I mean, really, once you're there, I don't think there's a duty of any documentary filmmaker to say anything other than this is a film on this subject.
Are you saying that once a filmmaker is there with a camera, it can't help but impact what people say or how they act? Or are you saying that just because the filmmaker is involved in the process, it's inevitable that something about how they view it will come out?
Well, of course, because they're editing it.
Yeah.
They're shooting it, they're editing it. We've made one documentary and we're in the process of making another one. And, you know, already we're looking at hours and hours of footage, but we're going to tell the story that we pull from that footage. I think with a documentary, as opposed to a narrative feature where you are following a script as much as you can, you know, unless you allow for some improv, a documentary is about as freeform as you can get in terms of choosing. You're getting ready to make a documentary, aren't you?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to the methodology you choose to use, because for me, it's a path of discovery, and we know the path that we want to take, but it's a little bit like the scientific method. We expect this outcome, but it might not be that outcome. We might end up uncovering something that's much more interesting.
And you go with that. And
absolutely.
I think that's a good way to put it, like the scientific method, you know.
Well, to back up a moment, I guess my question is more the way we view journalism in this country. I mean, we have an idealized view of what journalism is, right? I mean, it's supposed to be detached and neutral, and of course it's not, and it certainly is very different than it was 10 years ago, 50 years ago. But the ideal journalistic approach, and I'm not sure that a documentary film, is it supposed to fall into that category as journalism, or should we be very clear that a documentary is something very different?
I think it should be very clear that it's something different. I mean, I'm sure it can be editorialized, but I don't know. With journalism, you get very biased opinions, and you do get that in documentaries as well. It's not that it's not possible that comes through, but I think that more and more documentaries have to be entertaining. You know, the Hunter S. Thompson days of journalism are unfortunately, I don't know anyone that writes like that anymore, and I think that we're seeing more and more documentaries come to light that are pushing the bounds to be more entertaining.
And even when it's not a controversial subject, what was that film about the spelling bee? Was that wordplay?
Wordplay,
okay. You know, even in something such an innocuous subject as a spelling bee, they're picking the contestants that they're following. You know, it will be, and they will probably, they'll be like the obnoxious one. I'm just, you know, I don't remember exactly, but there will be the precocious one. There will be, you know, all of those people, all of those types
squares.
Will be ticked. They'll tick those boxes because they don't want to follow the same one. So already they've chosen.
Right. The idea where they've, like Best in Show makes fun of documentary filmmaking. It's a Christopher Guest film, and it does a great job of kind of illustrating how the documentary filmmaker, you're looking for the little train wrecks around the corner because that's what's entertaining.
Is this the dog
people.
with the dogs?
Best in Show.
Yeah.
Best in Show is a fictional film, but it's supposed to be a documentary. And it's a documentary.
Mockumentary.
Mockumentary.
Gotcha. And there are quite a few of those. It's a very hard genre to pull off.
Oh, yeah.
Only Christopher Guest.
He's really got it.
Spinal Tap.
Spinal
This is
Tap.
Spinal Tap.
Rob Reiner.
I mean, that was his first big one, wasn't it?
That was a huge film, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, but no, I think documentaries, they basically, there's such a wide palette now, and it's got to be left up to the viewer to decide. You're going to definitely have people's, their ideas are going to come across in the filmmaking. It's a nice idea to have the documentary filmmaker kind of, the idea that they're staying out of it. But there was one of the films that we showed at Cinema Curiosa was called McLuhan's Wake, and it was about Marshall McLuhan's media ecology. He taught classes at the University of Toronto on how to interpret basically media and how we're influenced by it, and that is something I still believe in my heart should be a core curriculum in modern education, because we are influenced by the images that come into our consciousness through television, news, and we do not get an education on how to perceive these things critically.
Which is why the Merlot business tanked after Sideways.
Because I'm not going to drink any
Yeah,
Merlot.
it did, yeah.
Wow.
I'm so serious. Alexander Payne's, you know.
Oh, you don't know the line? I'm not going to drink any Merlot?
Any blank Merlot. But what happened, and you know this is true, the California Merlot business tanked, and all of a sudden it was all Pinot Noir.
Yeah.
I mean, you couldn't give Merlot away. And, that is a great example of how a film can change society and business.
My understanding,
Television as well. I mean, when Oprah said she wasn't going to eat beef anymore, there was a big downward spike. You guys remember that? I mean, this was like 7-8 years ago.
my understanding is that when Babe came out, the pork industry took a hit for a while.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah.
cute little pig. Yeah.
So, okay, this brings me
And
to
I'm not going to SeaWorld.
Which brings me to a topic I was hoping we could get to today, and that is the idea or the question of, does filmmaking or entertainment, does it reflect a cultural mindset or does it shape our culture? And I want to get to a question to you, Rebecca, about war movies and how that's changed the opinions of wars. But before we get there, Kat, you were involved in a movie called Fall of the Dead.
Sure.
And I'm interested in your thoughts on the rise of the horror genre. And obviously The Walking Dead has just been huge on AMC. What do you think it is? What is happening there? Is this a storytelling or a particular kind of story that is reflecting something about where we are in America or in the West? I think this is probably more of a Western genre than anywhere else. What's happening there?
I believe that it's something deeper than just the horror genre. I think it's more about survivalism. And I think because we're a pretty privileged society, I know I don't have any needs or any wants for anything. Pretty much all of my basic human needs are taken care of. I think there's been a shift in mindset. Instead of, just fantasizing about what you could have, people are now fantasizing about what would I do if I didn't have all these things? how would I survive? What would I do if I were in that situation that I probably will never be in? And I think that, you know, zombies just happen to be one of the post-apocalyptic fantasy creatures that allow us to tell these survival stories of how we would behave if stripped away of all of our conveniences.
That's a great point, because as I think about it, most of the young adult books that have been turned into films have been dystopic stories.
Yeah.
Yes,
Absolutely.
totally.
Yeah.
I think that it will continue to see that for several more years.
Yeah, there's a huge trend towards all the dystopian stories that we essentially, it's like a coping mechanism that people need to, you know, the Road was definitely
man, that was
the most incredibly brutal film, and I mean it was troubling beyond all known measures and quantities, but it was also, you know, it's a coping mechanism that we have all of these troubles that we're bombarded with on a daily basis in the news. And logically, our brains have to take it to what are some of the final end, you know, outcomes of all of those anxieties and fears. When you do that, I think people have some kind of relief that they've finally been able to resolve and rationalize, and it's escapism as well.
Sure, but you do put yourself, as you said, Kat, in that mindset, what would I do? Which is why Jim and I have nicknamed our fattest cat Emmett for emergency meet initial target.
Oh, I love it. That's so charming.
Somebody's going to have to go. First.
Emmett's going first.
So this ties into the trend with superheroes as well. It's the same thing that you're saying, right? This is why superheroes are so popular right now.
Sure.
Right? We're in a national funk, right?
Well,
I mean, most teenagers, if we think about, as you said, young adult stories right now, most teenagers, not most, all teenagers, if you just do math, have only been in a world where we've been at war, kind of a post 9/11 world. I mean, they might have been very young, but
Yeah.
right. So that's very different than we grew up through the 70s and 80s, and a very, very different time and perspective that kind of shaped
there
our
were wars
worldview,
going
right?
on. There were definitely wars
But
going
war
on.
upon war upon war. So as Anthony was saying, the question of the impact of film on war and how we view war. Speak to that a little bit, if you could. I know, Rebecca, you.
Well, it's when I heard about this topic, for some reason, that was the first thing that popped up in my mind, because you can kind of trace them. And I was thinking, you know, there were that Born on the 4th of July was the first. Was a kind of a healing movie for the Vietnam War, whereas Apocalypse Now, you know, he took the Joseph Conrad Heart of Darkness story and turned it into something mesmerizing. So those of us who were, you know, watching TV then, we're seeing one thing on the television, night after night after night, and figures and numbers, and, you know, and then these movies came out that started a healing process or made you just freak out, like Deer Hunter. I mean, you can't, those three movies came into my mind. And then I started going back, and you know, World War II, and they put out movies to celebrate American heroes, and they then To Be or Not to Be, which was, you know, Lubitsch's it was Lubitsch, wasn't it? And, you know, it was a comedy about a Polish acting troupe trying to get through Nazi Germany. And then I started thinking, what happened in Korea? That's where we got MASH.
Right.
You know, we don't think about Korea a lot, but what we got out of there was MASH and The Manchurian Candidate, and a whole different black comedy. Manchurian Candidate was how would you describe Manchurian Candidate? It was just very, very dark, and showing the future was not that you could fool everybody.
Right.
Yeah.
You could fool everybody.
And conspiratorial.
Yes, very
suspense
conspiratorial.
thriller.
And but the first movie that won, war movie that won the Academy Award in 1930, All's Quiet on the Western Front. It's the same thing. It's like, feel sorry for people who die in war, but feel sorry for people who live through it. Mm-hmm. And, that's kind of, no matter what take you take on a war, from Hurt Locker back to that, we're starting to see, the society is starting with this whole hate the war, love the soldier. There's been a transition in society from, I can't go back through the entire history of war movies, although I'd like to, but that to me seems part and parcel of from 1930 to now, hate the war, but love the soldier.
I wonder how much of that is a reflection of the media coverage. The more the media has developed, the more people have been able to see, in some cases almost instantly, the realities of war that's happening. I mean, if you go back to the 1930s, when you just didn't have that kind of information, and even when you get to 70s, 80s, where now you're getting more info, but you're getting enough to know I'm not getting the full story. And I wonder, not just with war movies, but in how many issues media access with social media constantly. I mean, you've got people on the ground, these places, who are using Twitter and Instagram to show people almost in real time what's happening. I wonder how much that is changing the storytelling.
Yes, and showing the soldier showing up in the second grade class when the little girl looks up and there's her daddy, and he's been gone and she didn't, but it goes back to who's telling the story, because we have more access to those personal stories more frequently. We know all these people. Post-traumatic stress syndrome, they had to beat people over the head to even figure that out, and it's been going through all of these wars. But it's now an accepted thing, and I think a lot of that has been helped by film to accept post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Sure. I mean, Platoon was an amazing glimpse into. There have been a lot of great insights into the chaos of war, but until some of the more recent documentaries, you just didn't realize just exactly how chaotic and out of control what we think of as some the idea of militarized society is that there's all these surgical strikes and it's all so planned out and well, coordinates and all these things are so accurate, and then you realize now that it is really very, very, very highly chaotic, and there's not much clean or precise about it, and we're struggling with the questions of drone technology in the modern warfare, and basically I think that our culture is coming to terms with some of these realities. A lot of it is resulted in the fact that now we have strategic interests around the globe that, as a nation, we're obligated to protect, but as a society, we just don't really want to be there.
No. And the other thing you said about technology, I think film drives technology, especially. We're all seeing things that we saw in science fiction films actually happening. Still haven't had a flying car yet, like the Jetsons on TV, but,
not far off.
Not far off, but I really do think that science fiction and futuristic war films have pushed technology and vice versa.
So do you think the trend as well, not just with war movies, but in all movies, I've kind of noticed myself that in the past, especially, from the 80s on through, seemed to be more dramatized. You knew you were watching a movie. You knew these were characters. And it seems like the trend today is to really feel as the viewer that you're right there, and they feel more raw and gritty and not just dark, but I've seen a trend in this, like, you know, kind of shaky filmmaking, which gives me I'm obviously not the right demographic, but almost that you feel like the camera's there, and they're not hiding from that and making it feel more real.
It's almost from your own point of view as an observer.
Right.
I mean, the great thing, whether it's great or not great, is that can be another debate, but the great thing about the coverage of war through the media is that we get to understand the realism of war. Whereas, you know, before we weren't getting all of that, and we weren't able to soak it all up. I think that's impacted the more gratuitous nature in film, the way war is shown. I think it's very real, very gritty. Whether it's in war movies or not in war movies, we are seeing a less pristine version of the story. You're seeing, like you said, that the handheld movements as if you're actually witnessing it and following the story as if you're an active observer. I mean, you even see that in comedies on TV like The Office, you know. Right. You start to get a feel for that realism. You've got to believe also that reality TV, not just the media, but reality TV has also impacted that. We're used to that format, and then you see it extend into filmmaking. It's not a huge leap.
Yeah, that the shaky cam or the found footage type of film really adds that level of realism. I'm thinking in the movie Signs, the scariest clip in the whole thing was that very short handheld clip where you see an alien go past the end of the alley.
Yes. Because you wanted to believe that a real person would be holding it. Yes.
It was the Blair Witch Project that originated the shaky sort of, that's what started a lot of that kind of filming.
So with the few minutes that we have left, I'm curious, where do you think filmmaking is going then? So we've talked, you know, kind of about all these trends, and so will we return to a more uplifting, not so dark?
I would say everything under the sun.
Hopeful type messages through our films, or?
It's expanding at an exponential rate in all directions simultaneously.
You know, I wouldn't be surprised if...
well, that's an answer.
I wouldn't be surprised if in coming years we see culture dictate what we watch even more so. I wouldn't be surprised if we found out there was a choose your own adventure television series about to happen where people actually get to vote on what the next episode is going to be about.
Sure.
Because we're trending that way to have to produce so much faster. I wouldn't be shocked if something like that happened. I mean, with South Park guys, you've seen the documentary 6 Days to Air, right? They produce an episode every 6 days because they want to be culturally relevant with every single episode. I would not be surprised if we started seeing episodical films come out in that way.
Yeah. Well, there will always be the next new thing, but I think people are going to always go to a good story, no matter how it's told.
Absolutely.
If someone tells a good story or a different way in, and speaking of World War II, Schindler's List was a different way in. It was, you know,
Absolutely.
It was a total different, what was the documentary about the children that were sent to Britain? I can't think, it escapes me. That was a different way in to World War II that they, Orphan Train.
Orphan Train, yeah.
Orphan Train. You know, as soon as you heard it, Schindler's List, oh, he said, you know, Orphan Train, people were separated from their children, and the children were sent to England to be safe. And then you can imagine how many different things could happen. And you're compelled because it's a story that leads you into it and you want to go down that path. So whatever it is, I agree with Aaron that you know, it's going to be new stuff, like Kat says, and it's going to be everything. But a good story will always
stands the test of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with our last 2 minutes, quick question. Present company excluded. Give me one person that you think is the best person telling stories right now through film.
Wow.
Oh, that's so tough. Oh man.
Okay, 3 minutes.
I'm gonna just give a plug to Mike Judge and Idiocracy, who really crucified modern culture in a major way by taking it to some sort of cartoonesque sort of extremism. But it was a statement that needed to be made, and he did an amazing job. And it's one person. It's there's so much. But.
Idiocracy, electrolytes.
Yeah.
It's got what plants need.
That's right.
Love that movie.
Well, as I'm still actively working in LA and New York, I refuse to comment on the grounds and tend to cut me out of some possible job market. But it's really hard to say. It depends on what story when. You know, I will go see, you know, certain directors, whatever they make, and I've left Woody Allen off that list for a long time.
Yeah.
As you said, it's show business, not show art.
It's show business, yes.
Any opinions, Kat?
Oh man, it's so tough. His name's escaping me, but he was the writer on Breaking Bad. I think I would sign up for Vince. Yeah, that's right, Vince Gilligan. I'd probably go and follow him wherever he was going. I mean, filmmakers, there's so many. I love Sofia Coppola.
Yeah.
I just, I love her eye for visual storytelling.
Absolutely.
I just think she is one to watch. Gia, I can't wait to see her film. It's going to be playing at the State Theater, her little niece's directorial debut, and I'll be there to watch that.
And that's based on a James Franco book, and it's called Palo Alto is the name of the film.
Yeah.
So, Aaron, you're the guy in the Greater Grand Traverse region to come talk to, right?
Yeah,
Somebody's
you can
searching for
you can come and
either
see
the
us.
latest, greatest, or advice on a film to
We
take
do
home.
house
So,
all of the, you know,
excellent.
we have the back history of the film festival. Everything that's available on DVD can be
Good.
checked out from the Traverse Area
So we'll have
District
to
Library.
leave that as a plug.
Sure.
Anyone in our audience, if you want to know more about film, he's the guy to see, obviously, to get something to take home to watch, right? And thank you to all three of you for bringing your thoughts and opinions and discussing this topic with us.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
And thank you for watching In Focus.